For Wentworth.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Australia prides itself on being the lucky country, the land of the fair go. But since the end of the mining boom, Australia's economic certainty has been less self-assured. We're not making the businesses and innovation that will drive the next golden era of growth. Business investment is down, particularly in non-mining sectors, where it's fallen from 9% of GDP to 4% of GDP over the last 30 years. As a result, Australia has had the worst decade for productivity in the last 60 years, and Treasury has downgraded our long-term productivity assumption. Productivity is the key to growing prosperity and living standards. Over the last 40 years, productivity growth is responsible for 80% of real wages growth. Not to mention that in a cost of living crisis, boosting productivity is the only sustainable way to both lower prices and increase real wages. And people are noticing this gap in productivity. Only 8% of the country, recently in a recent Redbridge poll, believe that the standard of living in Australia will be better off for the next generation. This is unprecedented, and at the heart of this is our failure to address productivity. We need strong economic reform to drive productivity, and while I respect the contribution that the government has made in this term, it is nowhere near enough. And when I speak to businesses and I look at the productivity report, there are 4 key areas. We need reform of the tax system, we need it to make it simpler to do business, we need to ramp up innovation, and we need to make our tax dollars work better. Firstly on tax. With the last major reform in our tax system introduced in 2000, nearly 1 in 3 Australians have never seen a substantial change to the way that tax is collected. In that time, the shape of our economy has transformed and our society has fundamentally shifted. We need reform in the tax system, both to avoid taxes that distort the economy, such as stamp duty, as well as creating a tax system that incentivises the changes we know we want to make, such as to increase investment in our economy, as well as to boost aspiration and work. Secondly, we need to make Australia the best place to start and grow a business. Every government promises to cut red tape, but under-delivers. We're adding greater regulation. We're very good at that in this House, but we are not very good at removing it. And I speak to medical researchers who spend a quarter of their time writing grant applications, childcare workers who spend less time with the kids because of their burden of paperwork, and clean energy companies waiting 7 years for a wind farm approval. Part of this also relates to the burden on businesses relating to industrial relations, a policy setting that has become overly politicised in this country, swinging like a pendulum depending on who is in power. Research conducted by E61 shows that it has led to perverse outcomes on business decisions, including an driving casualisation in the workforce and a decline and an increase in capital investment instead of on investment in people. In the construction industry alone, productivity has declined by 18% on a per hours worked basis since 2012. So we need genuine review of workplace settings and an increase threshold for which these laws apply, particularly in terms of the effect on small and particularly young businesses. Thirdly, we need a ramp up on innovation. Australia is a more challenging place for companies to go from start-up to scale-up relative to our peers. On a per capita basis, Australia has half the early-stage investment per funding available than the UK and around a third of the US. This is despite having the 3rd largest pension scheme in the world. We've come a long way in this last decade, but data from the RBA shows that it's international investors, not domestic, who are doing the heavy lifting. The proportion of early-stage investment made from superannuation has declined from 60% to 30% in the last decade. This has several causes, but principally we need to look at RG97, Your Future, Your Super, and some of those incentives around early-stage investments, as well as how do we make sure that contracts, and particularly government contracts, are also open to young, innovative Australian firms so they can bring their best of the world-class innovation to Australia, not just to overseas. And finally, government is responsible for around 40% of spending in this country and is a major, frankly, government spending is a major drain on our productivity growth. So this has to be an area of greater scrutiny, making our tax dollar work better. And I think the place to start, time and time again, is infrastructure spending, where we spend billions of dollars a year in this space, but we are losing $30 billion at the current rate on cost overruns. So I urge, finally, the Treasurer and the Government to come back to us honestly about the Productivity Commission's report on advancing prosperity and tell us which ones they're going to back, because these policy settings are not nice-to-haves. If we do not get this right, the economic opportunities we took for granted won't be available to our children.